Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Beijing. More Chinese cities and provinces have reached GDP milestones last year, with the number of cities in China's trillion-yuan GDP club rising to 29. And Iran rejects Washington threats, saying ready to respond to any U.S. attack. Welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Anna in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our top story. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for China and the United Kingdom to work together to safeguard global stability and promote shared development. He made the remarks while meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Beijing, where both sides agreed to develop a long-term stable relationship. He also expressed support for expanding people-to-people exchanges and said China is considering unilateral visa-free entry for UK citizens. Starmer reaffirmed the UK's unchanged policy on the Taiwan question, highlighted the UK's willingness to deepen cooperation in trade, investment, climate action, and global governance. He added that closer exchanges would benefit both countries as well as global peace and stability. Starmer is the first UK Prime Minister to visit China in 8 years. He also scheduled to visit Shanghai. So for more on this, joining us on the line is Chen Shirong, Managing Editor of Foremost Foreign Media and China Report magazine. Before the trip, Starmer described China as an opportunity and said engagement with China is essential, a remark that President Xi Jinping also referenced during their talks. So how do you read that comment, and how do you assess the British government's overall view on the future trajectory of China-UK relations today?
The Labour government in the UK came to power in July 2024. And before that, we all know the relationship between China and the United Kingdom was very, very uncertain, unstable. So in order to change what he is now calling from the gold age to the ice age, he will have to present some concept of re-engagement. And one way of doing that for the domestic audience and probably internationally too, he will have to say re-engaging with China presents an economic opportunity, as well as due to China's importance on the global stage, there would be benefit for global issues too. In that sense, the new Labour government has been trying steadily in the past 2 years to re-engage and improve the relationship between China. As to the future trajectory, I think this is a very good start. Since Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with Chinese President Xi Jinping back in 2024, on the sidelines of the G20 summit, he has already expressed the willingness to re-engage, re-establish good working relationship, and he proposed actually to visit China or inviting Chinese officials and leaders to visit the UK. In that sense, this historic visit to China would mark the beginning of the thaw, but the relationship would improve because bilateral ties was on the ice or frozen. So from now on, it can only get better. But how far the two sides can work with each other and how smooth that working relationship will be, we'll see. It depends on the issues, and it also depends on the domestic needs of the United Kingdom and also how the international situation is changing.
Mm-hmm. Then, considering the ups and downs in bilateral ties and today's uncertain global situation, what domestic and external factors do you think are driving the adjustment in the UK's China policy?
Domestically, we know the UK economy is suffering, especially after the COVID pandemic. And China has been maintaining quite steady economic growth for the past few years, around 5% GDP growth. Whereas in the UK, we are expecting a final figure of only 1.5% during the past year for the UK economy. So the Labour government says their business is to promote economic growth. How do you do that? You cannot promote economic growth without taking a good look at the vast economy, the second largest economy in the world, that is China. And the Chinese consumers like British goods and these services as well. So that is on the domestic side. Internationally, I think the UK, during the previous Labour government, interesting enough, President Xi Jinping mentioned the Labour government has played the role of strengthening bilateral ties. And it's not too far away from the Beijing Olympics during 2008. The UK government at the time under Sir Tony Blair was doing very well in terms of promoting bilateral relationship. Even after that, during David Cameron's premiership, he also tried to improve relations, of course. So by engaging with China, by working with China, they have already seen the benefit, both for the British economy and for solving some of the global issues. So in that sense, this is something they will have to work on. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer, not too long ago, in fact, early December last year, even accused the previous Conservative government of dereliction of duty not to engage with China. So we'll see how far he is able to go, push against all the opposition, and also try to smooth the relations and try to strike the right note.
Mm-hmm. Building on that, before this visit, Starmer emphasized that London doesn't need to choose sides between Beijing and Washington. How do you interpret the U.S. factor in the recent shifts of British policy toward China, especially given that China has recently welcomed leaders from several Western countries?
The visit from the EU countries, from Canada, that forms part of a backdrop of the whole world kind of re-engaging but readjusting their perception of China. And they can see from the last 12 months, since Trump's second term, that the world is in turmoil, and they were often dealt with tariffs, punishments, and all sorts of things. So in that sense, China has stood as a stable and reliable partner to play with. At the same time, we must remember the UK has always been saying there's a special relationship existing between the UK and the United States. And the UK, the US, and the three other countries, they form this so-called Five Eye network in terms of security and intelligence. So the UK would not be distancing itself from the United States. At the same time, there has been very, very perceivable pressure from the US for the UK not to get close to China. Whether it's due to security reasons or due to strategic realignment or even for economic benefit to the US, there has been pressure. There's no doubt about it. We have seen in the past the treatment of Chinese companies in the UK, for example, very much under the influence of US government. So this is a kind of difficult triangle, if you like. But Sir Keir Starmer said, well, the UK government will not be forced to choose between the US and China. And I hope he can strike the balance right.
Mm-hmm. Then let's shift to China's perspective. During the meeting, President Xi once again stressed China's principles that China remains committed to peaceful development and has never initiated a war and never occupied an inch of foreign land, and that no matter how strong it grows, it will not pose a threat to other countries. Why do you think China felt it's important to repeat these points at this key moment in China-UK relations?
I think British opposition parties here in the UK, they have been trying to say the Prime Minister shouldn't visit China and that China has posed a threat to the UK and all sorts of, or some would say, scaremongering. At the same time, mentioning that China would not initiate a war or occupy another country's territory. It is ironical, isn't it? Here he is, the British Prime Minister, coming to Beijing to meet the Chinese president. And he also mentioned Hong Kong as a unique and important bridge between the two countries. But that is also a very, very subtle reminder that, look, we didn't come to occupy any part of the British Empire or even the British Isles themselves. We have been peaceful. And who was the aggressor, the occupier? So in that sense, the idea of China posing as a threat to the United Kingdom, at least on the surface, it's not worth attacking. Of course, as countries develop, there would be rivalry, there will be competition, and that is a different matter. It's economic strength and power. Let's face it, Britain was no longer the empire it was, and China is becoming stronger and stronger. To be honest, if the outside world, the other countries perceive China as some kind of a threat, in a sense, it is a tribute to China. Before China's opening up, I don't think anybody would treat China or see China as a threat. It's only now, as China is becoming stronger and stronger and more powerful economically, militarily, and so on, has more people, whether rightly or wrongly, or with whatever intentions, they say, oh, China is a threat. In a sense, that is confirmation of China's growing power.
As you pointed out, Starmer explicitly mentioned Hong Kong, and he said he welcomes Hong Kong continuing to serve as a unique and important bridge between China and the UK, and also stated that the UK's long-standing policy on the Taiwan question remains unchanged. So what positive signals does this send, in your opinion, and how important is it for building trust between China and the UK going forward?
I think this has to do with both sides. For China, it is very important for any serious relationship to affirm that they do not support Taiwan independence. They treat Taiwan as part of China. They were not supporting whatever the current Taiwan regime is doing. In terms of Hong Kong, as we know, Hong Kong, maintaining prosperity in Hong Kong has direct economic benefit for the United Kingdom. There are many companies, many businesses from the UK who are working well, and some companies, they derive a large part of their profits from Hong Kong, from East Asia. And culturally, let's face it, the connection between Hong Kong and the United Kingdom is very strong. You can see from the flights, the exchanges between the two sides, and so forth. So maintaining this relationship, improving the economic status of Hong Kong can only benefit the United Kingdom. The mutual trust, I think, lies in the sense that for whatever Hong Kong administration is trying to achieve, I think it will be in the interest of both sides, in the interest of bilateral ties, for the UK to take a kind of hands-off approach rather than getting closely involved or even interfering.
Indeed. One last question. Some people in the UK say past policy swings cost Britain many opportunities. Now China says it's willing to consider unilateral visa-free entry for UK citizens. If that really happens, how much could it boost people-to-people exchanges and, help the British public see China in a more rational way?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the United Kingdom has been looking very eagerly on China's visa policies regarding other countries. Many European countries and Asian countries have got unilateral sort of visa-free access into China, especially for tourist visits. So UK public and business have been lobbying about this. Hey, why can't we do it? Why are we left behind? In terms of benefit, I think it would benefit both sides, both economically and in terms of, as you say, improving mutual understanding. It is through people-to-people contact. It is through the level of understanding of how people see China is developing that they would see the attraction of the relationship between the two countries. I can give you a personal example. My daughter grows up in the UK. She visited China a few times. And then when she got back to London, she basically said, Daddy, I wouldn't mind working in China. It's so convenient. It's so dynamic. So the mutual visits, including Chinese people visiting the UK, would help strengthen the ties at the people-to-people level. A political relationship, especially in the UK, the governing party may come and go. It's the Labour government now, and in a few years' time, who knows which party would come to power. But so long as there is a basic desire to visit, to know, to do business with the other side, the relationship will go on.
Thanks, Mr. Chen, for those insightful analysis. That was Chen Shirong, managing editor of Foremost Foreign Media and China Report magazine. Coming up, more Chinese cities and provinces have reached GDP milestones last year. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
You've been listening to World Today. Despite global uncertainties and domestic challenges, more Chinese cities and provinces crossed the key GDP thresholds in 2025. Cities of Wenzhou and Dalian became the latest to join China's trillion-yuan GDP club, lifting the total number of such cities to 29. Shanghai and Beijing lead the rankings, with Shanghai nearing 6 trillion yuan, or about $860 billion, while Beijing has surpassed 5 trillion yuan, or over $710 billion. So for more on this, Xu Wen spoke with Dr. Yao Shujie, Chang Kong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University.
Professor Yao, Northeast China has long been an industrial powerhouse, but Dalian is the first city in the region to join the trillion-yuan GDP club. With the GDP surpassing 1 trillion yuan, that's roughly $150 billion, Dalian witnessed a 5.7% year-on-year growth last year. So how did the city balance upgrading its traditional industries while fostering new drivers of growth to achieve this breakthrough?
I'm very pleased to learn that Dalian has become the first city in northeastern China to become the 1 trillion renminbi cities because it's highly significant for the northeastern part of the country. I think the traditional industries such as shipbuilding and also manufacturing is the key pillar of the Dalian economy. Especially the shipbuilding is growing in a very rapid rate of more than half of the industrial level compared to 2024. The increase is about 57%. Now, Dalian is also a very important port, in the northeast. International trade, transportation, raw material, and also the digital economy has also become the new emerging industries. So Dalian only built on the traditional strengths of the manufacturing sector, but also running very fast in the newly emerging industries such as the digital economy, robotics, and high-end manufacturing.
We have also noticed that the city of Wenzhou from Zhejiang province has also crossed the trillion-yuan GDP threshold, becoming the third city in the province to do so after Hangzhou and Ningbo. What do you think were the key factors that helped Wenzhou reach this milestone?
Yeah, Hangzhou and Ningbo, they are very large cities. They are not only 1 trillion, they are close to 2 trillion yuan. They are major city in Zhejiang. Zhejiang is one of the most dynamic and prosperous provinces in China. In terms of per capita GDP, is one of the highest in the country. Zhejiang is also very famous in terms of the private economy. Wenzhou is typically dominated by the private enterprises. And the strength of Wenzhou is building on the dynamism of the private industry, which is highly adaptive to the market conditions. Traditional manufacturing and now upgrading to the high-value, high-end manufacturing is the major foundation of Wenzhou. Wenzhou's economy is also very dynamic in the service industry. The Wenzhou people, they provide services to all parts of the world, especially the small manufacturing, which make in large quantity, we ship it to all parts of the world. And this is the successful story of private economy in China, because Wenzhou is a very typical city in this case. The other successful factor is that because Hangzhou and Ningbo is a large megacities, and they have a very strong spillover to the neighborhood, such as Wenzhou. So the interconnection between Wenzhou, Hangzhou, and Ningbo is also driving factors for the dynamic growth of Wenzhou city. It could be possible to any other city within Zhejiang, just like Wenzhou happened to be bigger than the other regional cities in Zhejiang province.
Professor, with Dalian and Wenzhou joining, China now has 29 cities in the trillion-yuan GDP club, and most of the cities are concentrated in the southern and eastern regions, with the Yangtze River Delta, Pearl River Delta, and Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei urban clusters leading the way. How do you see the role of regional economic clusters in driving this growth, and how can these economic clusters help drive growth in less developed cities and regions?
Over the last 15 years or so, I have been developing an economy theory to explain why economy can grow in such a dynamic way. I example, for example, like the large megacity as the fast-running horses, and the smaller city are the so-called slower running horses. And all these horses, they pull each other to become major economy center, and they try to jump across the so-called middle income trap. The megator is the so-called horse mass jumping the middle income trap. In this case, in Zhejiang and Jiangsu in particular, the major cities such as Nanjing, Suzhou, Hangzhou, and Ningbo, they are the growth center, and they spill over to the nearby medium-sized cities, and pulling this medium-sized city up to a much higher level, the so-called 1 trillion yuan cities, which are highly concentrated in Jiangsu and Zhejiang, and also Jing-Jin-Ji, and also the Guangdong and Macau, and also Hong Kong Bay economy area, where you have Foshan and also Dongguan, which are pulled up by Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Now, this is highly concentrated in the eastern part of the country. And I hope that these concepts spill over if it could be going toward the central part of the country and also the western part of the country. The western and central part of the country, we have some megacity, but the smaller city, they still have some way to go.
Professor, in addition to the 29 cities that have already joined the trillion-yuan GDP club, cities like Xuzhou, Shenyang, and Shaoxing are close to reaching the trillion-yuan GDP mark. Which other cities do you think are on track to join the club soon, and what factors will determine whether they can succeed?
Yeah, I think in Jiangsu, you have Xizhou, which I think the statistics is still not yet released. But most people believe that Xizhou could be already a 1 trillion yuan city. And then next year, I think there are some potential city. The most likely city is Shenyang, Shaoxing, and also Shijiazhuang, Xiamen. There are quite a lot of cities which are in between the 800 billion to 900 billion yuan at the moment. And I think then one push forward will move this city toward the 1 trillion yuan benchmark. Probably in the next 1, 2, or 3 years, we probably have another 10 cities in China which join to the 1 trillion yuan city club. This is precisely what we need, because the bigger city move into the medium-sized city, and the medium-sized city to the smaller city. It has some sort of geographical equal distribution of large city, which become the local economy driver, the local economy engine, to pull the vast area of the smaller town and also the countryside. So China is now entered a stage of the very dynamic geographical change at the moment.
Lastly, Professor Yao, Shanghai and Beijing are leading the trillion-yuan city rankings with strong growth, each posting a 5.4% increase in GDP last year. We have noticed that Shanghai is accelerating toward a GDP of 6 trillion yuan, while Beijing has surpassed its 5 trillion yuan mark. What do you think are the main factors behind their success, and how have they managed to maintain growth despite challenges such as transitioning away from traditional industries?
I'm very pleased to see that Shanghai and Beijing has become a leading, driving engine of the Chinese economy as a whole, which reflects my previous theory about the horse jumping, the large and also fast-running horses. Actually, Beijing and Shanghai have undergone a very rapid period of economic transition from the traditional industry to the high-end industry, which are highly dominated by automation, by AI, by digital technology, and also computing and software and Internet of Things. Shanghai and Beijing has successfully transformed from the traditional industrial base to a new base which is driven by high technology and innovation. And this explains why Shanghai and Beijing are as a very fast-running horse.
That was Dr. Yao Shujie, Chong Kong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University, speaking with Xu Yawen. More to come. Iran rejects Washington's threats, saying ready to respond to any U.S. attack. U.S. consumer confidence dropped to lowest level since 2014. And we'll also hear from the president of the Canada-China Business Council on Chinese EV exports to China. This is Road Today. We'll be back after a short break. You've been listening to Road Today with Mika Anna in Beijing. Iran has rejected renewed military threats from U.S. President Donald Trump, saying it's prepared to respond forcefully to any attack. An advisor to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei wrote on social media that Tehran would target the United States, Israel, and their supporters in the face of any U.S. military action. Trump, meanwhile, warned that U.S. Armada would be deployed unless Tehran agrees to negotiate a nuclear deal. The White House is reportedly weighing a major new strike on Iran after preliminary talks on curbing Iran's nuclear and ballistic missiles programs failed to make progress. To delve into this, let's have Dr. Wang Jing, professor at Northwest University in Xi'an, China. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
Professor, so that U.S. has sent a carrier strike group to Iran, and Iranian experts are calling it ongoing military intimidation and psychological warfare, with Washington saying time is running out and hinting that a strike could be way bigger than before. So how do you rate America's real military goal here, and what do you think the next move might be?
I think the United States military strike might be very, very, very likely because, on the one hand, as you mentioned, there has already been the aircraft carrier near the oceans of Iran, and also on the other hand, 2 more aircraft carrier are on their ways to Iran. So I think that's why United States now is actually rallying and mobilizing a very, very strong military presence near Iran for the preparation of military strikes. So that is very sure. And also, on the other hand, the gap between the stances of United States and Iran are still very apparent, very strong, because from United States perspective, they believe that Iran should become more active over the negotiation table, and also Iran should make concessions over several major issues. And also from the Iran's perspective, that the United States is still trying to impose new threat to Iran, and under the circumstances, Iran does not want to talk with the United States directly, does not want to make any concessions against the United States. So that's why the gap cannot be reached, cannot be filled. So that's why I think the military strike might be very likely, but just a matter of time.
If there's such a strong possibility of U.S. action, then how do you rate Iran's response? Because Iran's foreign minister also said they can't negotiate under threats and the U.S. military pressure won't work. What underpins the tough stance from Iran?
Well, I think the Iran stance are very clear that Irans are very assertive and they want to continue their military preparations for any possible strikes from the United States. And meanwhile, that we know that the United States, and they are mobilizing their forces along the bases, not only the aircraft carrier, but also along the bases inside the country near Iran. So that's why I think it will give new chances for the Irans to the targets for counterattack. And in turn, it will bring everybody in this region into the scenario, that very dangerous scenario and dangerous situation. So that's why I think Iran's assertive response are clear that if United States dare attack Iran, the Iran's response and Iran's counterattack will be also very, very strong and very, very serious, and then bring everybody, not only United States, but also Israel and maybe some other allies in this region, into a very, very conflicting scenario, and then endangers everybody's security.
Reports indicate that the U.S. has showed Iran with 4 strict conditions, halting all nuclear activities, transferring enriched uranium, limiting missile ranges, and seizing support for regional armed groups. So how do you assess the sincerity of U.S. negotiations? Is this unilateral intimidation genuinely about nuclear issues, or are there deeper strategic motivations behind U.S. actions toward Iran?
I think the United States has already shown their very clear stances that they want the conditions that the United States want Iran to make. So that's why under the very military stress and, as you mentioned, the deterrence, that Iran, from the United States perspective, they should make concessions, they should compromise. So that's why, according to the United States diplomatic characteristic on the Donald Trump administration, their conditions, their stances are always very clear. I mean, ranging from what they want in Greenland, what they want in Venezuela, and also what they want in the Middle East. They always put forward the very clear stances and clear claims that they want. And then they, through the military threats and military deterrence, to force the other side, targeted side, to make concessions.
Professor, experts say the U.S. usually weighs the costs and benefits before going to war because starting one is easy, finishing it is hard. With Trump facing an election and the Ukraine stalemate and other commitments, do you think the U.S. can really handle the risks of a war with Iran, like chaos in the region, energy shocks, and tensions with major powers in the Middle East?
Of course, we cannot say that every kind of the possibilities of crisis and consequences after the war could be very, very carefully calculated and pre-calculated by the conflicting sides. It's impossible. Nobody have this kind of the vision. Nobody can have the capabilities to predict the future. So what we could do right now, I think, including the United States, is try to calculate what happened next and then to arrange what they want and what should be done. So the problem is right now is that the United States, they face internal election upcoming, and also they have to pay attention to what is happening on the Iran, on the Ukraine and Russia war, and also on how to develop the relations with other countries, particularly its allies. But I don't think these factors will prevent the United States is doing, because the United States, as we mentioned repeatedly, that they have now a very particular diplomatic characteristic that is under the military deterrence and the threat. They could impose new claims to their targeted country and targeted side to force them to make concessions. So once the other country, the other side cannot resist this pressure, they will make concessions. Otherwise, they will just start the military strike directly. So that's why I think this is the new circumstances I think Iran should face. And I think this is also the new factors we should calculate rather than always be too rational.
Mm-hmm. Professor, one last question. How about Iran's neighbors? How do you think Iran's neighbors will react if things spiral? And what kind of moves and strategies might they take?
Well, I think Iran's neighbors now are actually in a kind of dilemma because, as you mentioned, they have their military bases, United States military bases inside their own territories. But then they also said they also reject very strongly of any attacks from the United States from within their own territories against the targets inside Iran. So they don't want to show their hostilities towards Iran, and also they don't want to cut their close ties with the United States. So they just don't want to make balance. While the rivalry and the hostility between United States and Iran grows, these things will make any attacks from any kind of this kind of the balanced attitudes, particularly for the Iranian neighbors, very difficult to maintain. So that's why I think I don't think that their kind of the maneuvering or their kind of the mediation efforts can work because they try to bring the two sides together, but I don't think it will work, particularly given the circumstances that the United States is now mobilizing more military forces into Middle East for the preparation of the strikes against Iran. So I think that's why these countries become fragile and weak. Although they want to change something, I don't think they will change successfully.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Professor, for the clarity and in-depth analysis. That was Dr. Wang Jing, professor at Northwest University in Xi'an, China. Coming up, U.S. consumer confidence dropped to lowest level since 2014. This is Road Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
You've been listening to Road Today. U.S. consumer confidence has fallen to its lowest level since 2014 as households remain concerned about inflation and the rising cost of living. The Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index, a closely watched survey that measures how Americans feel about the economy, dropped nearly 10 points in January from December's rating of 84.5. It shows Americans becoming more cautious about major purchases. Respondents also reported growing worries about business conditions, income prospects, and job opportunities, raising concerns that confidence in the economy's resilience may be starting to fade. For more on this, let's bring in Dr. Zhang Gong, professor with the University of International Business and Economics. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Professor, U.S. consumer confidence has fallen to its lowest level in nearly 12 years. How serious is this drop compared with previous downturns?
Well, I think this is a quite significant event. It shows that the U.S. economy isn't as strong as President Trump likes to boast about. I mean, if you compare this to the speech he delivered at Davos just a few days ago, it's such a sharp contrast. There he was talking about, the greatest economy, great job market, and the great the construction boom, stuff like that. But in reality, if you look at the cold statistics, isn't showing a picture that President Trump portrays. So I think there's something structural going on here, and moving forward, I think United States economy will be more or less of the same situation right now. It's just going to continue to weaken a little bit.
Does it reflect deeper structural economic problems in the United States?
Yeah, I think I think people are reporting these kind of a sentiment, probably not just so much out of the concern for the economy. I think the political instability, the United States sort of smattering abroad in other countries, President Trump's immigration policy and the violence currently occurring in Minnesota, all of these things are combined. I think people are viewing the current event more than just from economics lens. They are seeing a sort of a picture of an instability here. And also, from the economic side, I think the prices are starting to be showing up in quite high level. So I think all of these things combined is really cutting to people's perception of the economy. The market psychology has really changed, and it's a big problem. I think the problem is probably coming more from the political side.
Mm-hmm. Survey data show that this drop in confidence spans respondents across all political affiliations, with independents being the most pessimistic. Confidence also fell most sharply among consumers aged 35 and older, as well as households with low income under $15,000 annually and high income $50,000 and above. How do you interpret this broad-based indiscriminate decline? Does it reflect the pervasive nature of current economic challenges in the U.S.?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think the difficulties being faced by the U.S. economy right now has anything to do with different groups, different ethnic groups, different political inclinations. It's nothing to do with that. It's across the board. I think it hits particularly hard on the cohort of the population, as you just mentioned, people 35 years old. These are the bread makers. They are usually married with children at home, have family to feed and have to keep the food on the table, have a mortgage to pay. These are the people who are bearing the brunt of difficulties of the U.S. economy, and also, of course, the people with low incomes. They are particularly hit by the worsening of the job market. These people are less robust to this kind of economic fluctuations, unlike the middle class and upper middle class that has a cushion in place for something like this. I think for low income family, you're out of job for 2 months, you could potentially be homeless. So these are the people who are being hit particularly hard, and they definitely felt most painfully about what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Professor, do you mind walk us through how Americans are coping with the rising cost of living today? Because the reports show that high prices remain a top concern for consumers. Are affordability pressure now becoming the biggest drag on household spending?
Well, let me first say that the pricing level hasn't really come down, unlike what President Trump has been boasting about. Definitely the tariffs are taking effect. The price increase, in my view, are permanent and very difficult to drop to the level of the pre-pandemic level. And particularly, if you look at the exports, the imports from China, which has been the driving force for over a decade of very low and reasonable price levels in the United States. All of these things are being encroached upon. You look at China's exports to the United States as being dropping month by month. On the other hand, high tariffs are driving the prices up, and there's no free lunch here. You can't get away from this. Now, in terms of coping with these difficulties, consumers don't have many means to get around that. I mean, there are only two ways of doing this. One is borrow money. Mm-hmm. I think American consumers are already charging more on their credit cards. They are extending their credit card debt further into a depot. Fortunately, President Trump is doing something here. He's capping interest rate, which is a good thing, I think, for a lot of people. The second thing is just very simple. You cut back on expenditures. You reduce the number of meals dining out. Instead of going to Whole Foods store, for example, you go to Walmart. You go to discount stores. You care less about whole food. These kind of things are being cut back. You spend more trips in the mall. You buy less clothing, I guess. You postpone the plans for buying big ticket items. I think, cars, for example, in the United States are very expensive these days. What do you do with that? People are driving cars more than 10 years old, with 20,300 miles on them. You postpone, moving to a new house, and all of these things are happening. So I think eventually it's going to be showing up in the GDP number. People are going to cut back on the expenditures, and consumption is going to be affected.
We also see that a lot of Americans are seeking more jobs to cover spending, but the survey shows a clear deterioration in perceptions of job availability. Where are these concerns stemming from, and could weakening labor market sentiment spill over into slower hiring or even layoffs in the months ahead?
Well, what's happening right now, I suspect, is of structural in nature. I think has a lot to do with automation, has a lot to do with AI. I mean, this is essentially a story of machine replacing man. And these changes are structural. The labor market has to adjust to that, but there's going to be a time lag for the adjustment. Essentially, historically what happens is that while a lot of jobs are being lost, more jobs are being created over the long run. And there's going to be an adjustment period in the labor market, and people are going to be adjusting their career choices to the new economic realities, they're developing new skill sets, studying new things, and there's going to be a transformation in the labor market. The problem is that it's going to take some time, and this adjustment process is very painful for a lot of people. They won't be able to adjust, especially I think people in their 50s and late 50s, late 40s, early 50s. These people for them are very difficult to change their career and adapt to a new career choice. It's very difficult for these people. So I think it's going to be quite difficult for a lot of folks, but nevertheless, the future job market is definitely going to be very, very different.
Thanks, Professor, for those valuable insights. That was Dr. Zhang Gong, professor with the University of International Business and Economics. A Canadian business leader in China says the new Sino-Canadian trade deal is widely applauded in his country as expected to generate a major growth opportunity, especially in the EV and agricultural sectors. Canada-China Business Council President Graham Shands made the remarks when commenting on the agreement from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's China visit last week. Canada will lower tariffs on a quota-limited number of Chinese-made electric vehicles, while China cut tariffs on select Canadian farm products. In an interview with Tian Wei, Shands also highlights that the agreement opens the door for Chinese automakers to establish vehicle assembly operations in Canada, leveraging Canada's strong auto parts manufacturing base and a skilled workforce.
The EVs, we see the deal between China and Canada. It's about reducing the tariffs on the Chinese EV into Canada, but there's a cap over there. Meanwhile, China has also lowered the tariffs on some of the farm products coming from Canada into China. Tell us how this balance of deal is being done.
It's great to see. You've got to situate these tariffs in the context of the respective economics of diplomatic relations, trade relations. That was set up, it appeared from my perspective, by the two governments as the standoff. So that had to be dealt with, and it's great to see that there's an agreement, the details of which have a certain number of vehicles. I think it's 49,000 initially, rising to 70,000 down the road, inside the structure that you mentioned. But as a former trade negotiator, I know exactly how that fits, and it's good to see that rising over time. From a Canadian interest perspective, what I found most interesting and important in terms of what the Prime Minister said on the very specific details of EVs is that China is a world leader in the technology and in the production. It's a value proposition that will have the effect, and he took some pains to talk about the price point coming into Canada. As a Canadian, it's a lower price point than others can supply the Canadian market, which is super important in terms of the transition on vehicles, because at the moment, EVs are almost unobtainable by normal Canadians, if I can put it that way. So it's good to see that that's part of the consideration. But equally importantly, it's not just the sale of cars manufactured in China into the Canadian market. It's a commitment to see the possibility of assembly operations in Canada by Chinese EV manufacturers over time. My own hometown is in an area that in the middle of the car industry in Canada, Southern Ontario, a little town called Waterloo. as a famous university, but it's in that whole zone, that belt is the auto zone in Canada. So it was great to see that there's the possibility of assembly in Canada, which is really important because we have a very good world-leading parts manufacturing operations in that area, some of which have actually come over here and have substantial investments in China.
Now, Mr. President, there were a lot of discussions, if not rhetorics, between Canada and your neighbor about the auto industry, whether one needs or the other or not, and what is the nature of this interaction. Now, how do you see this China negotiation with Canada with the backdrop of that and the overall evolvement of the auto industry in the world?
Yeah, you're taking me back to the negotiating room in the late 1990s for China joining the World Trade Organization. And at that time, it was really the European original equipment manufacturers and the U.S. original equipment manufacturers, through their negotiators, their respective negotiators, trying to gain access into the China market. So if you flash forward to today and you see the light vehicle sales in China, which are something like 25 million a year, I think the U.S. market is, or the European market is something like 22 million a year. The U.S. market is maybe 16, 18 million. Nobody would have predicted in 1998, 1999, 2000 that the Chinese market for personal motor vehicles, light motor vehicles, would be that number, and nobody would have predicted that it would be electric. The majority now, as I understand it, of sales in China and on the EVs. So it's a remarkable turnaround, which I can say I've witnessed in terms of the quality of air around the roads in Beijing, to pick one example.
And as a result of that, what does that mean for Canada to be sustainable in the industry when you talk about this deal between China and Canada, not only on the cap, on the tariffs, but also on the future investment into Canada?
Well, I think we'll remain a very attractive investment proposition. I think we'll continue to have a very vibrant automotive parts and final assembly. And Canada itself has free trade agreements with a host of other countries, including access to the European market. So while some Chinese manufacturers would normally think, well, why go to Canada just to get access to the U.S. market? The answer to that is, well, you're gaining access to the Canadian market. You're also gaining access to the European market in terms of assembly. And given the quality of our workforce, the tax rates that we have, I think it will be attractive for inbound investment from China.
Many of the farmers in Canada are also applauding right now because we have seen the reduction of tariffs against the Canadian farm products by China. So what does that mean? How much impact will that make?
I think it'll make a lot of impact for Canadian farmers, as well as we have meat producers as well, and in canola, on pulses. There was a deal on pet food, which is also affecting our agricultural sector, on seafood. So for the farmers and the ranchers and the seafood harvesters and the seafood production, it means a lot. And stepping back, I think from China's perspective, Canada should be viewed, whether it's on farm products, agricultural products, as a trading partner in general. We're politically stable. We've been having access into the China market from even before we had political diplomatic relations. We had wheat sales. So the quality is there, the reliability is there, our political stability is there. So as a diversified supplier into the China market on the agriculture, agri-food, food, value-added food, Canada should be viewed inside China as a long-term and reliable trading partner that can go through the ups and downs and the waves on the international ocean, if you will.
Can China or others trust the capability of this administration to implement the results of the discussion?
I think so. I think it's a commitment that will stand the test of time. To my earlier point about the need to diversify, that's, in my judgment, that's not going to go away. If I look at areas that are a priority for Canada, which include renewable energy as we try to meet our climate change commitments, China is a major producer of solar, of wind. Now, wait, I'm going to sound old, but when I came here first to China in 1981,
I'd like to hear history.
There were 60 gigawatts of power installed in China. There were 80 gigawatts of power in Canada. So again, to be clear, Canada produced more electricity in 1980, 1981 than China did when I came here for the very first time. And now You look at Canada, which has something like, I think from memory, I'm not an expert, but 150, 160 of gigawatt capacity. I know there's a dam being built or a power facility being built in Western China, in Xizang, and it's going to have a capacity of, I think, 70 gigawatts. So that's more than the capacity that existed when I first came to this country in 1981.
That was Graham Shen. That's all the time for this edition of World Today with me, Anna. Thank you so much for listening.